When I was a teacher in Boston, I remember one day when a student commented on a haircut that I had gotten recently, kind of like the haircuts Deacon Steve has gotten in the past couple weeks since he started this new do that everybody likes so much. And the student said to me, "Mr. V, you look sick." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, no offense. You look ill." And I realized it was a compliment. And it reminds me of how much words matter and how sometimes a word that we use to really make a point sometimes can make the opposite point accidentally. For example, we have always been told that the fear of the Lord is a blessing, is a fruit of the Spirit. The fear of the Lord. And that's an interesting thing because it is the same word, fear, that you would use for a problem that some people have in their relationship with God. There's a lot of people that are actually afraid of God. And I don't know if that's something that you can look at your own life and say, yeah, I've dealt with that myself. Others might say, I'm confused. Why would you be afraid of God? But it's interesting that fear is the emotion that is meant to tell us there's danger nearby. That's the purpose of fear. Fear is an alert system to let you know that there's danger somewhere nearby. And the question is, should we be afraid of God? Should we see God as a danger? Maybe a danger that needs to be dealt with or avoided? The first reading today talks about what it's like to see God as a danger that needs to be avoided. That's what we hear in the reading from Deuteronomy. People don't want to hear God's voice. They said, "Don't let us hear God's voice, Moses, or we'll die." Isn't that interesting? That ought to cause us to pause. I don't want to hear God's voice because I'm afraid that if I do, I'll die. But wait a minute. God's voice is what gives us guidance. The psalmist sings, if today you hear God's voice, don't harden your heart. God's voice is the one that tells us, go ahead and take that job. That's going to be the right move for you. God's voice is what tells us it's time to get out of this unhealthy relationship. It's not serving you anymore. God's voice is what has told a lot of people here present to be married to your spouse. God's voice told me to be a priest. So what is this? Don't let us hear God's voice or we'll die. There is a spiritual law at play here, actually, that is maybe worth taking a look at. And that is, we are always moving in a direction in our spiritual lives. We're always moving in a direction toward faith or toward fear. We're always moving in one of those directions. And we should acknowledge that God's voice guiding us is likely to make us feel a little bit afraid. Because if we take the job, we have to sell our place and move to Minneapolis. And if we get out of the relationship that we're in, that means all of our dreams and plans all of a sudden shift like that. If you get a call to become a priest or a sister, suddenly you've got to change your major in college. So we have that moment that we have to decide, what direction am I going to move in? Am I going to move toward God's voice, or am I going to move away from God's voice? Now, I have to tell you that I think I've really gotten to a new place in my life as a disciple because I used to preach something that I don't think was the full truth. And maybe you've heard me say it before. I used to preach that we have to choose. It's a hard choice, faith or fear. And I no longer think that it's that easy. I no longer think that it's a clear choice like that. Because haven't you ever been dealing with both faith and fear at the same time? Haven't you ever been afraid, but still gone for it? I'm still going to take the job. I'm still going to propose, even though there's a part of me that's afraid of commitment or afraid of this move or afraid I'll fail. Haven't you ever had faith but then experienced a temporary setback in your faith, where you feel like you've been going along trusting God and believing, and then you wake up one day and it's not so easy? I think those things coexist in us so often. And I think the idea of the fear of the Lord is so true. It's such an expression of something we should have in our relationship with God, but it just misses the mark in the way that the language speaks to us. Because after all, fear is the appropriate response to being in the presence of danger. And God is mighty. In fact, God is almighty. But God's not dangerous. God is all-powerful, and we ought to be aware of that and amazed by it, but not afraid, because God is not dangerous. We get to hear in the gospel exactly where the fear of the Lord can be twisted to hurt us. So the scene is in the synagogue, which is like a parish church for the Jews in Israel. Jesus walks into his parish church, his synagogue, and he starts preaching, and everyone realizes, wow, this guy's the real thing. And it says that a person with an unclean spirit starts yelling, I know who you are. You're the Holy One. And then, have you come to destroy us? There it is again. God is here. The Holy One has arrived. So now are we going to get destroyed? You're going to wipe us out? There's that fear. And you hear how Jesus deals with that fear. Quiet. Come out of him. There's kids here. What are you thinking? Now, we don't know what that unclean spirit was. We don't know. It could be that the person had a mental imbalance. It could have been that they had a possession. It could have been, but whatever it was something unwholesome. It was something dark. And Jesus will not have it. Do not try to make people afraid of God, Jesus says. I didn't come here to destroy you. I came to save you. So all of us are being given an opportunity to look at our own lives and see where we might have thought that we were respecting God, but we actually were letting ourselves get afraid of God. Even today, we might have a sense that we want God to kind of stay a little bit away because we're a little bit afraid of what having God direct our lives would really mean for us. Here's an example. They say that the number one fear that humans have is fear of dying. Fear of dying. But that's the only way to eternal life. That's the doorway. So how interesting. I don't know what your relationship is with the word purgatory. How do you feel about purgatory? Many people are afraid of it. But that's how God prepares us for heaven. I don't know what you feel when you think of the word judgment. Judgment Day. But we're told that God overflows with divine mercy. You know, a lot of us have to admit, too, when I say the word heaven, we think, do I really want to spend eternity on a cloud with a harp? I don't even know how to play the harp. I kind of like it here. I like Dunkin' Donuts, and I like the things here, right? So we have to admit, a lot of us are afraid of the very things that are the cornerstone of our faith. So this week, our homework is to take a look at how fear has crept into our relationship with God. How have we told ourselves, oh, I have fear of the Lord, I respect God, but it's no longer respect. It's become something different. And maybe a good way to start is to just ask yourself about those words. How do you feel when you consider the word death, or the word purgatory, or the word heaven? How much have you thought that your fear of the Lord was respecting the Lord, but you actually realize those words make you feel afraid? Have we allowed ourselves to, instead of seeing God as almighty, start to actually think that God is dangerous? I think the gospel gives us a good insight into an appropriate way to express what we call the fear of the Lord. It says that when people saw God's authority, when people saw that Jesus spoke as one who truly had authority and not like the scribes and the Pharisees. It said they were astonished and they were amazed. That's different than afraid. They were astonished and amazed. They were filled with awe that someone this mighty, someone almighty, could speak to them. Words matter. And it might be that my haircut made me look ill or sick, but it might also have been a compliment. And since God is not dangerous, we need to make a decision to walk away from fear and toward faith.